So, Indira, we have three distinct examples with one profound difference. Do you see a difference there that's meaningful?
Well, sure. I mean, first of all, I have to say that I wrote about this for Poynter because, I think it's important that we as journalists think really hard before we use words. Words have meaning. And at least what happens in this country is that the media, as well as authorities and politicians, tend to jump to the conclusion that if a Muslim brown person carries out an attack, it's very quick to appear in the headlines that this was somehow linked to terrorism, whereas if a white person carries out a similar attack, they're much more likely to call him a lone wolf, deranged. In this case, the sheriff in Las Vegas used the word distraught, but not link it explicitly to terrorism. This certainly comes off as potentially being biased, but there's a deeper question here, which is the legal definition. Both in the United States and in Canada, the criminal code definition of domestic terrorism involves that it not just leaves people feeling terrorized, but that there also be a political motivation or links to an extremist group. So this is why you've seen, the hesitation in calling, for example, Bissonnette in Quebec City a terrorist or Paddock in Las Vegas a terrorist, because authorities have not yet established any ties that I know of to terrorist groups or political motivation in those cases.
So, but getting to that point, as I was saying a moment ago, the people in Vegas must have felt terrorized. Does the word have any real value anymore, or does it become a kind of a dog whistle word?
That's a great question, because to feel terrorized is, of course, something that I think one feels from any kind of a violent attack. It doesn't matter what the motivation is. So in our sort of common parlance, certainly we would all consider that terrorism. That's different, of course, from the legal definition, which does involve that it also has to have some purpose of coercing the government or influencing policy under the U.S. criminal code. I think the larger problem is that, of course, how we write and speak about violent attacks in the news shapes public perceptions. And if we are quick to associate Muslim assailants with terrorism and not so quick to associate white perpetrators, it certainly creates a perception.
Very quickly, I want to look at the guidance that CBC journalists are given when trying to figure out when to use the word. And this is a bit of a summary because frankly, it's about a page long, the guidance that we get. But among that is avoid labeling any specific bombing or other assault as a terrorist act unless the term is attributed. Also, don't judge specific acts as terrorism or people as terrorists. Instead, simply describe the act or individual and let the viewer, the listener, the reader decide. In your view, is that adequate guidance, or do we need to be adjusting this as this issue comes up again and again?
Honestly, I think that's excellent guidance, and it's probably a lot stronger and more explicit than the guidance most of us have in U.S. news organizations, where it's more sort of up to the individual reporter and their editors to determine how they're going to use it. CBC is a large and publicly supported institution, and it makes sense to me that you would have explicit guidance, and that to me seems pretty clear, that you should describe the legal actions of what the person has done rather than labeling them with what has become essentially a colloquial term that in some ways, as you suggested, has lost meaning, but still carries, a stigma and public perception, and rightfully so, of course, if something is terrorism and extremist-oriented.
Indira, thank you for your time.
Thanks so much for having me.